So, picture this. You've got helicopters landing at the Wall Street heliport this morning, armored trucks rolling through Manhattan with what looks like a presidential motorcade, and barricades everywhere around the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Protesters are already lining up on both sides, some waving Venezuelan flags supporting Maduro and others absolutely furious at him, and the police are struggling to keep them separated because tensions are through the roof. Then around noon, Nicolás Maduro walks into that courtroom wearing a blue jail uniform, and the guy looks absolutely stunned. His wife Cilia Flores is with him, and she's got this massive bruise on her forehead plus what her lawyer says might be broken ribs from when they got captured Saturday. They're both in handcuffs initially, then the cuffs come off as they sit down with their lawyers, and Judge Alvin Hellerstein walks in to start what's supposed to be a routine arraignment. Except nothing about this was routine because Maduro immediately starts acting like he's still running a country instead of sitting in an American courtroom facing life in prison. The judge asks him to identify himself, and Maduro doesn't just say his name. He goes into this whole thing about how he's the president of Venezuela, how he was kidnapped and captured from his home in Caracas, and how none of this is legitimate. He's not scared or apologetic, he's defiant as hell. And you can tell the judge is already getting annoyed because this is supposed to be a quick procedural hearing where you just enter your plea and move on. But Maduro keeps interrupting, keeps trying to stand up and make statements, and at one point he literally tells the judge, "I am a decent man, I am innocent, I am still president of my country." The judge finally has to cut him off and basically says, "Look, we're entering a not guilty plea on your behalf whether you like it or not because that's how this works." Then Hellerstein reads the charges out loud. Narco-terrorism conspiracy, conspiracy to import cocaine, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices, and Maduro is just sitting there taking notes on a legal pad the whole time. The judge asks if he understands the charges, and Maduro says through his interpreter, "I am innocent, I am not guilty of anything mentioned here," which is technically a not guilty plea, but he's making it sound like some grand political statement instead of just legal procedure. Then the judge turns to Cilia Flores and asks her to identify herself, and she doesn't just say her name either, she goes, "I am Cilia Flores. I am First Lady of the Republic of Venezuela," like she's still in the presidential palace instead of federal court facing drug trafficking charges. When the judge asks how she pleads, she says not guilty, completely innocent, and she's way more subdued than her husband, but you can tell she's in pain from her injuries. Her lawyer Mark Donnelly actually has to request that she get medical attention for the bruise on her forehead and x-rays for her ribs, because they think she's got broken or severely bruised ribs from the capture. And the judge notes that for the record but doesn't really address it immediately. Now here's where it gets really interesting because Maduro's lawyer is Barry Pollock, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because this guy represented Julian Assange and helped negotiate that plea deal where Assange walked free after pleading guilty to espionage charges. Pollock also got Martin Tancliffe exonerated after he spent 17 years in prison for murders he didn't commit. So this is a serious high-powered defense attorney, not some public defender. Pollock stands up and tells the judge that Maduro is the head of a sovereign state and entitled to privileges from that status, and there are major questions about the legality of his military abduction that they'll be filing voluminous motions about. The judge listens but doesn't really engage with that argument during arraignment because this isn't the time for legal debates about jurisdiction and immunity that comes later in pre-trial motions. Instead, Hellerstein just moves through the standard procedure, informs both defendants of their rights, including the right to consult with Venezuelan consular officials since they're foreign nationals, and asks about bail. Neither Maduro nor Flores requests bail, which is smart because there's absolutely zero chance they'd get it anyway since they're massive flight risks who literally ran a foreign country until 2 days ago. The judge says he's open to receiving a bail application in the future if they want to file one, but for now they'll remain detained at MDC Brooklyn, which is the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn where they've been held since Saturday. Then Hellerstein sets the next court date for March 17th, which is over 2 months away, and gives both sides time to prepare their arguments, file motions, exchange discovery, and basically start the long process of pre-trial litigation. At the very end of the hearing, Maduro asks if he can keep the notes he's been taking on his legal pad, and the judge says yes, Which seems like a small thing, but it shows Maduro is trying to maintain some sense of control and agency, even though he's completely powerless in this situation. As they're leading him out of the courtroom, some guy in the audience stands up and yells, "You will pay on behalf of Venezuela," and Maduro turns around and responds in the name of God, "I will be free," which is this incredibly dramatic moment that basically sums up how surreal this whole thing is. Then, as he's walking out into the hallway with marshals escorting him, another person calls him illegitimate, and Maduro responds in Spanish, "I am a kidnapped president. I am a prisoner of war." Like he's trying to frame this as an illegal military action instead of a legitimate law enforcement arrest. His lawyers didn't talk to the press afterward. They just left quickly while reporters were shouting questions, and Polak only said to one reporter that what President Maduro said in court speaks for itself, which is classic lawyer speak for "we're not commenting on anything right now." Outside the courthouse, it was absolute chaos with protesters from both sides. There were Venezuelan exiles celebrating because they'd been waiting years for Maduro to face justice, holding signs and chanting, genuinely emotional because they never thought this day would come. One woman named Pia Baez, who's 40 years old, told reporters her people had so little hope that Maduro would ever be taken out of power. And this was like a light at the end of the tunnel, something joyful after years of suffering under his regime. But there were also Maduro supporters waving Venezuelan flags and calling this an illegal kidnapping, an act of war, American imperialism, all the usual rhetoric. Police had to keep them separated with barricades because tensions were so high, and you could feel the weight of what just happened. An American president ordered the military capture of a foreign leader, flew him to New York in handcuffs, and now he's sitting in jail awaiting trial. Meanwhile, back in Caracas, Maduro's son Nicolásito gave this speech to the Venezuelan National Assembly where he demanded his parents be returned and called this a kidnapping that threatens global political stability. He said if we normalize kidnapping heads of state, no country is safe, and today it's Venezuela, but tomorrow it could be any nation that refuses to submit. Delcy Rodriguez, who was vice president, got officially sworn in as interim president, though she made it clear she still considers Maduro the legitimate president and called the US action illegal military aggression. The geopolitical fallout is spreading fast because Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum condemned the operation and said the Americas don't belong to any power, which is a direct shot at Trump invoking the Monroe Doctrine. Russia called it armed aggression. Colombia's president warned the world, but Argentina's President Javier Milei praised it, and Florida Republicans like Marco Rubio and Rick Scott are thrilled, saying they got a call early Saturday morning about the operation and were ecstatic. At the UN Security Council, there was an emergency meeting where America's Ambassador Mike Waltz compared this to the 1989 operation against Manuel Noriega and argued it was a legitimate law enforcement action against a fugitive responsible for narco-terrorism that's killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. But the top UN official warned the US may have violated international law with unilateral military action in a sovereign nation, and other countries are raising concerns about precedent. Back in New York, Manhattan U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton told CNBC his office is completely comfortable with this prosecution, which is prosecutor speak for "we've got the evidence, and we're confident we can convict." The indictment is 25 pages long and alleges Maduro partnered with narcotics traffickers and narco-terrorist groups who dispatched processed cocaine from Venezuela to the United States, enriching himself and his family while thousands of tons of drugs flooded American streets. The evidence includes cooperating witnesses like Hugo Carvajal, Venezuela's former intelligence chief who pleaded guilty in June 2025 and is now testifying against Maduro, plus financial records showing shell companies Maduro used to buy luxury jets and hide money, intercepted communications between Maduro and cartel leaders, and forensic analysis of seized cocaine shipments traced back to Venezuelan roots. It's not a weak case built on rumors, it's years of DA investigation with documentation, recordings, and insider testimony. So Maduro is sitting in MDC Brooklyn tonight processing what just happened, probably still writing notes on that legal pad, still convinced he's the legitimate president of Venezuela, and this is all an illegal kidnapping. But the reality is he's in an American jail. He's been charged with crimes that carry life in prison, The evidence against him is overwhelming, and his next court date isn't for 2 months, where his lawyers will start filing motions challenging jurisdiction and the legality of his capture. Those motions will probably fail because the precedent with Noriega is clear. You can capture and prosecute foreign leaders for drug trafficking, especially when the US doesn't recognize them as legitimate. The trial could take a year or more to actually start, but when it does, he'll be sitting at a defense table in Manhattan Federal Court, listening to witnesses testify about the thousands of tons of cocaine he allegedly helped move into America, and a jury will decide if he spends the rest of his life in federal prison. That's what happened in that courtroom today. A dictator who thought he was untouchable found out he's not. A judge who's handled major cases before calmly processed another defendant despite all the political drama. And the American justice system started grinding forward with a case that'll define how the US deals with foreign leaders who commit crimes against Americans. Whether this was legal under international law is a question that'll be debated for years, but in that courtroom today, it was just another arraignment, another defendant pleading not guilty, another case added to the docket, except this defendant happened to be running a country until 2 days ago, and now he's inmate number whatever they assigned him at MDC Brooklyn, wearing a jail uniform, eating commissary food, and realizing that being president doesn't mean anything when you're standing in front of an American judge reading you charges that could put you away for life. That's the story of what went down in that Manhattan courtroom today, and honestly, it was one of the most surreal legal moments in modern American history. If this breakdown of the courtroom drama helped you understand what actually happened today, hit subscribe because this case is going to dominate headlines for months, and I'll be covering every twist. Drop a comment on whether you think Maduro's immunity defense has any chance or if he's definitely going to prison. And share this because most coverage is just sound bites, but you need the full story to understand how wild this situation really is.